another minute and then we'll get underway. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and greetings from 12 hours into the future. We are in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, for the global convening to negotiate on climate action. If you're joining this, you probably know I'm Wade Crowfoot, and I lead the Natural Resources Agency. And this is a very special installment of our Secretary Speaker Series, where we bring big ideas, lift up priorities we share, and bring along to introduce speakers and leaders from across California. I thought it was important this week to share what we're doing here in Dubai and why I'm here along with so many other leaders. The global climate negotiation, this global climate negotiations is called COP28, which stands for Conference of Parties, and it's organized by the United Nations. The UN, as we know, exists to solve global problems, and no challenge is more global in nature than climate change. So 30 years ago in Rio de Janeiro, nations of the world under the UN auspice, the organization, came together to establish an agreement on climate change called a Convention on Climate Change in UN speak. And 30 years on, nations of the world have evolved that agreement and continue to adjust it in an effort to curb global climate change. So COP28 refers to essentially the 28th Conference of Parties. That is the nation states that are part of this international treaty. So here in Dubai, there are 198 countries, including our own, that are negotiating on updates to this global agreement. There are tens of thousands of people here. So there are representatives of the national governments, as well as representatives of what we call our subnational governments, our states, our provinces, our regions, our cities. There are members of civil society, business leaders, et cetera, all focused on how do we move further and faster to combat climate change. So we are right now at a reception after a long day of meetings. And so what I'm going to do is bring on in just a few minutes some leaders that I'm with today to share their perspective on this negotiations this week, and then to share their perspective as well. But before I do, because I don't have much of a background, because it's the evening and we're not actually at the negotiations, I wanted to share a brief slideshow that provides some of the sights of what we've been experiencing this week. So this is the Expo City, which is essentially a giant convention center and conference grounds in Dubai. And this is us walking in to this huge conference and negotiations at about 7:30 in the morning yesterday. It's a beautiful space, in part because Dubai built this for the World Expo in 2020. Next slide, James. Dubai, it turns out, is a huge city. It's a sprawling city. It's a city with very challenged air quality. The air quality index was about 180 when we were here. Not great air quality. And of course, curious that it's being held in United Arab Emirates, which is a huge oil exporting state. The United Nations transfers the location of the Conference of Parties in a different region each year, but there's been major focus on fossil fuels this year, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide. So world leaders came here and are here throughout this 2-week period to give you a sense. This was a plenary session that I watched, and this is, of course, the French president. Next slide. A lot of this is happening, which is there are members of advocacy groups, civil society, tribal governments, governments like California that are not in the negotiations, but meeting reporters everywhere, just a total international scene. Next slide. A lot of conversations look like this, which is folks from around the world in conversation with one another. This is one of the many pavilions. This is a pavilion focused on mobilizing cities and regions on climate action. So a lot of what's being discussed is we're pushing our nations to move further and faster on climate change. We're also sharing with each other how we're doing that in our own places. Next slide. And then this is the actual negotiation. So you see these name cards, and if you move up front, there are the actual name cards of the different countries. And this is one of the African leaders giving a presentation before the actual formal negotiating body. Next slide. And then this is a coalition of regional, state, and provincial governments called Under Two. California and a state of Germany started this to push for stronger action, 180 governments. And so we're on the leadership body of that. And this body over the next year before the next COP is pushing for stronger action on fossil fuels, methane, equitable global finance, and a more central role for subnational governments. Next slide. I thought this was just an awesome picture. These women are from Kenya, and they're youth ambassadors. It's beautiful and deeply global. People are wearing their traditional dress from around the world. It just reminds you that how global this effort is in nature. Next slide. This is one of the many what we call bilateral meetings, government to government meetings we're having with Catalonia, which is an autonomous region in Spain. We partnered this week to launch the Mediterranean Climate Action Partnership, 14 governments across 5 regions that share a similar climate and therefore face increasing wildfire, drought, and extreme heat. And this was us with the environment minister from Catalonia. You may recognize a couple folks in this photo. That's Senators Henry Stern and Ana Caballero. We're joined by, I think, a dozen legislators led by Speaker Robert Rivas. Essentially all here with the same message, which is, you know, the world needs to move further and faster. California provides a model of what we need to do. We certainly don't think we have it all figured out in California, but as the world's 5th largest economy, believe it or not, California has a really influential role. And so when we're leaders fanning out across this huge conference, that's the message we're sending. Next slide. This is just another photo of that, actually the same plenary session with Emmanuel Macron from France, just to show you the global nature. This was on making global climate finance more equitable. Next slide. And actually, this is a little bit of a teaser because one of these guests is coming on in just a moment, but this was the US pavilion, and the person on the left is the president's climate advisor, Ali Zaidi. And these are mayors and governor of New Mexico from left, the mayor of Madison, the mayor of Greenville, Mississippi, and Des Moines, Iowa, and then our friend and colleague, Serena McElwain from Maryland. Really important for the US to show that we are all in on this. So we talked about the alignment between the Biden-Harris administration, the mayors, and governors. Next slide. And then there's just a lot of this informal conversation. This is again with Catalonia, but it gives you a sense of the work that we're doing. You know, there are myriad languages spoken, so translators like this one on the left are all over the place. And in this case, the environment minister only speaks Catalan. So we had this whole partnership this week launch in actually 4 languages. Next slide. And then the media is all over the place, and it's really cool to see all of the international media. And it's pretty fascinating to, again, recognize how global this is in nature. Next slide. All right, I think that's it. So just wanted to give you a sense of some of the sites of the, oh, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Just wanted to give you a sense of some of the sites of the negotiations. So without further ado, we're going to bring on our first guest. And again, what we're going to do is just do some interviews with people that are here at COP. Just give me a moment. I've got a technical problem. So bear with me here. For some reason, it doesn't look like we're plugged in. Okay, so we have a little bit of a battery problem, so we're just plugging in. This is truly a live broadcast here. Uh, it's like, bear with us here. We're just plugging in. Okay, that looks to work. All right. Well, you know this is live when we have technical challenges, so it keeps on alternating. Bear with us. We're just having some technical difficulties. Okay, whatever you did, just leave it there. Oh, yeah, leave it there. It's still not doing. It's still. All right, we are back, and so sorry about that. We are using an adapter that is non-functional, so we lost power for a little bit. But my colleague Serena McElwain had, with the cooler heads prevail, and she said, "Just get out your phone."
Yeah, we're here now.
So Serena, thank you so much for joining us. Many Californians may recognize Serena. She helped to lead the California Environmental Protection Agency before she was recruited by Governor Wes Moore to lead environmental efforts in Maryland as the Secretary for Environment in Maryland. So Serena, welcome to our live broadcast here from Dubai.
Thank
I want to ask you just a little bit about, you and I have been here about the same time. Why was it important for you to be here, and sort of what's your primary purpose for being here in Dubai?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me. This is incredible. So happy to be with you. It was important for Maryland to be represented. We're doing so much when it comes to climate change. We have a lot of ambitious goals, and just being here at COP with all the energy, just speaking from a subnational level,
Yeah,
where all the states are talking about what we can do to be more accountable and to make sure that we're meeting the Paris Agreement and just doing our part. Because as you know, the states, we rule.
Yeah.
I mean, when globally, if there's a moment where the global national commitment is slowed down, not the states. We always work together, and I wanted to be here to represent.
That's amazing. And you and I have been on panels because one of the, there were obviously huge questions during the Trump administration about whether America, can continue to lead. And it was states like Maryland, like California, like a lot of other states across the country. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Just tell us a little bit about what's happening in Maryland and what you're sharing about, with other folks that might not know.
Oh my goodness, thank you for that. We're doing so much in Maryland. Our climate goals are the most ambitious. We're trying to reach 60% greenhouse gas reduction by 2031. That's aggressive. We're also trying to reach net zero by 2045. And so in order to do that, it's a society approach.
Yeah.
And so we're just doing so much. We're looking at building energy performance standards. We're trying to change the building sector. We're trying to push EV. We have very low percentage when it comes to EVs. We're at 1.3%. California is at 27%. So we want to learn from you all. We want to learn from other states.
Yeah.
So it's just important that we work together to meet these climate goals.
Thanks so much for that. And then what's your impression of COP? And a little bit, I'll talk some about what's happening in these negotiations, but in the sort of the zone that we're in, what are you seeing?
It's amazing. Oh my gosh, so many panels. They have the local government, the local summit that came. I think that was the first time this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all the states are coming together and representing. And
yeah. Right? And that was a really important point, which is the COP presidency, which is United Arab Emirates, was under some pressure to create a more central role for cities, for states, for regions to actually figure in, because we're on the front lines of implementing this work. Right. And so actually the first 2 days of the COP officially were the local climate action summit, which included our governments.
And because of that, I understand that this COP is the largest ever.
Yeah, it is.
Triple.
Yeah, it is.
Triple the amount of people, the amount of emphasis. So this is huge. This is like the biggest COP ever.
Yeah, and 5 years ago, this whole process had a breakthrough in the Paris agreements. Nations around the world, basically every nation agreed to set their own commitment to collectively hold temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. 5 years on, there was just a major assessment called the Global Stock Take about where we're at on that. And what we find is that collectively we're not moving fast enough. So, from my perspective, it's an implementation crisis. And when you have states like Maryland and California in the United States, but then other states and provinces around the world, we're the ones that are actually reducing emissions. They're bringing on renewable energy or shifting to electric vehicles. So we need a more central role in this.
That's right. It's also a scale thing. Just trying to get infrastructure to scale, renewables. That's the issue. We're trying to phase out fossil fuels, but when you do that, you have to have a path forward, a strategy, and that's renewables. And so I think that's another challenge, just making sure that we have the scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share a little bit as we've talked about what's happening in these, negotiations. So, nation states are really, I'll mention three things. One is fossil fuels. So many nations, certainly including ours, and California is driving this, are calling for ultimately being very clear about the phase out of fossil fuels. Important to ensure that we're all committed to phasing out fossil fuels, not phasing down or mitigating, because if we're going to meet net zero carbon by 2050, which is what scientists tell us we need to bring the climate back into stability, we need to phase out fossil fuels. The other is attacking methane, which is a super pollutant. It's not carbon dioxide, but it actually has the impact for global warming, and it's called a super pollutant because the impact is much greater. It's a short-lived pollutant. So there's a lot that we can do on methane. Big progress where oil companies around the world, probably in part because they're under such pressure on fossil fuels, committed, I think, yesterday to reduce their methane leaks from oil and gas production down to zero by 2030. And then the Biden administration rolled out its new methane rules, which will make the United States have essentially among the strongest standards in the world to eliminate methane. And then the third major area is global climate finance. So those that are in the countries that have the least responsibility for climate change are oftentimes bearing the worst burden. So these are small islands nations. These are Caribbean countries that are impacted by growing hurricanes, those in the global south. So we're focused on supporting this effort across the world to ensure that more of our finance that's driving this transition actually gets invested in places like Africa and Latin America and Southeast Asia. So that's a major focus here as well.
And it's just a testament that the United States, we're showing up, right?
Yeah.
We are showing up.
Yeah.
We're doing our parts. Maryland is doing our parts. California, again, when you have aggressive goals, you have an implementation plan. We have a new climate action plan coming out December 31st.
Yeah.
And that plan will really show all of Marylanders that we are serious and we're going to do what we can to make sure we meet those commitments.
Awesome. Serena, thanks so much for stopping by, for all the work you do.
This was great.
All right. Hey, next I'm going to bring on somebody that you'll recognize in California, and that is Ricardo Lara, who is our state insurance commissioner. Ricardo, you're going to hold this phone a little bit because I'm going to get us back and running.
All right.
We're very ambitious in terms of doing this live, and therefore we've had some technical difficulties. So I'm just going to bring us back in online here, but just tell us a little bit about what you're doing here. Obviously, we know the challenges. Well, talk a little bit about, first of all, the challenges we face in the insurance realm in California, but a whole, across the country as a result of climate change.
Right. Well, we know that climate intensified events are only exacerbating the need for insurance, because insurance is used to make sure people are protected, that people can rebuild, and that we're protecting our most vulnerable communities.
Yeah.
And so what's been going on, as you rightfully know, and people know, in California, it's becoming much more difficult to find affordable and accessible insurance. But that's happening around the globe. We're all tied. So when there's fires in Greece, when there's fires in Louisiana or Alaska, or floods in Bangladesh, that all affects us and our ability to find insurance that's affordable. And so here at COP, we are a bunch of insurance experts are working together to make sure that we are coordinating and that we're working towards not only as making sure.
Okay, we've got the computer back running.
All right.
Okay.
This is live TV.
It is.
This is what happens. So as we work globally to ensure that not only that do we keep insurance companies accountable to make sure that they provide the coverage, but that we also give them the keys and the tools to be able to assess where are we most at risk. CAP modeling in terms of how do we see where these fires are happening most or floods. So all this is all interconnected. So at COP, we're working on these different strategies to make sure that we're protecting people.
So, I mean, you're the elected insurance commissioner for California. You're part of an association of insurance leaders from across the country. You shared earlier this morning that a pretty exciting announcement. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. For the first time, all the insurance commissioners throughout the United States have come together and built a resiliency strategy for the insurance sector, looking at closing protection gaps, ensuring that our most vulnerable also have access to insurance after a fire, extreme heat, or floods. Also, we're looking at collecting data for the first time around climate and insurance. So what are those gaps that we need to look at? Because as you know, Wade, without data, we can't measure anything. Right? And so data becomes key. So we're going to do the first ever data call for insurance companies around climate. That's unheard of. We've never done that before.
And you said that, this isn't a Democrat or Republican issue, and actually insurance commissioners that were helping you drive this effort were from Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi. Why there?
Absolutely, because we're seeing what's happening in our the lowland parts of our country and in the South. Look at what's happening in Louisiana. They've had 13 parishes that were on fire. We've seen what's happening in Alabama, again, with flooding. And actually, Alabama has been a leader around giving people incentives to harden their homes from floods. They've been doing that already for 15 years, way ahead of what we've been doing in California. So we're learning from each other. And like I said, it's really, insurance doesn't know partisanship.
Right.
As you know, Mother Nature is the biggest advocate for uniting us because she doesn't care.
Yeah.
She's gonna demonstrate that we need to come together, we need to be quick, and we need to be very, very intentional when it comes to protecting our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're using this global convening to connect with insurance companies, leaders from different countries, but then actually using this to get all of the insurance commissioners together and advance this effort. And to me, it's fascinating. I was part of a panel today, and I think it was, and we were talking about this challenge, and I was able to say that places around our country and around the world are having similar challenges that we're having in California. And I think you said this morning that nobody wants to live in an uninsurable world, but we have to help the insurance industry evolve with climate change.
Right. That is not an option, right?
Yeah.
We need insurance. Insurance is critical for protecting our assets, protecting our communities, and protecting our lives. So what we're doing is ensuring that as we move forward, what are the new insurance products that we're going to need?
Yeah.
Right. When you look at like what happened in Pajaro, how many people had flood insurance?
Well, and that's a really good point because Pajaro, California was a working class, working poor community, primarily of farm workers that got impacted by the floods last winter.
Right.
So bringing equity into this.
So how many of them were able to recover through the flood insurance program? It was only 500 500 homes that had insurance, flood insurance. So who pays for the rest, right?
Yeah.
And then who makes sure that everybody equitably has the opportunity to move out of their home to make sure that, they're not living in a home that's still wet, that might have fungus, that might then injure themselves, through their house. And so we were working on our climate insurance solutions to ensure that everybody has a base level of coverage. But that means elevating the risk to the community, elevating the risk to the state, so that we're now entering into these insurance policies to make sure that everybody has equitable protection.
Yeah, it's so great. You've been to several of these COPs, I think, as a state senator, as a legislator. And so what's your take? And what would you say to people that might say, geez, it's the 28th climate conference, it's a talk fest, is it a waste of time?
I would say, look, it's critical that like minds get together from around the globe. As you know, we're all interconnected. And to be able to have conversations with your colleagues from around the world that are like-minded and working on similar solutions is critical. But that's why it's important to go back home with a clear goal in mind.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? What are you going to work on? For me, particularly this year, we're going to make sure that insurance companies have a net zero plan by 2050, right? And so every year we come back and we grow and we make sure that we follow up on the work and the conversations that we're having here.
Yeah.
The bill that around the United States just came up with a methane reduction program.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Governor Brown and I worked on that from the COP in Paris.
Yeah.
And we came up with the most stringent methane reduction bill in the United States history. That came out of COP. And so it's also, they're right. We want to make sure that we're not just talking the talk, but that we're walking the walk, especially when we come home.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I always say is California has a lot to share, but we can always learn. And we have work to do in California, so we'll bring those learnings home. Cardo, thank you so much for being here, for being a leader of our delegation.
Thank you. Safe travels.
Yeah, good luck for the rest of the COP.
All right.
I should add that while California and other American states are leading on reducing methane, there's more that we can do. And we are actually standing up a subnational methane action coalition. And my colleague, Leanne Randolph, who leads our California Air Resources Board, is here spearheading that. I should also mention my colleague, David Hochschild, who leads our California Energy Commission, is here. And in coming days, we'll have some exciting announcements about international collaboration on offshore wind. And then soon we'll be joined by Agriculture Secretary Karen Ross and the Governor's Tribal Affairs Secretary, Christina Snyder. So I want to bring on another colleague and a veteran of COPS, a friend of mine who's actually from another government, and that is Yurok government. Yurok tribal government is a federally recognized tribe in California, our most populous tribe in California. Javier Kinney is with us. First of all, great to see you.
Thank you, Wade.
Thank you for joining us. So let me ask you a question. a lot of folks that don't know a lot about UROC or tribal governments or COP might ask the question, why are Native American leaders, why are indigenous leaders here at COP, and sort of what is your agenda?
Well, thank you so much, Secretary. It's again an honor to be here with you. The Yurok tribe specifically is exerting its inherent diplomatic missions here and engaging at COP28. We have been engaging since Bonn, Germany, and COP29 for three main reasons. First and foremost, the advocacy for indigenous rights, not only at the local, state, international levels, but the implementation and enforcement of those rights, not only by parties, but again, by the various ancillary aspects of industry, non-governmental organizations, as well as philanthropy and other indigenous communities. Secondly, is providing the technical expertise, because again, as we had mentioned in Egypt as well, is that there is no climate answers and solutions without indigenous people decision making. A lot of the natural resources are based on indigenous lands, but that storytelling, that technical expertise, and again, the technological development that's occurring now has got to be driven by indigenous peoples. And third, and most importantly, just as we engage in cultural diplomacy domestically, we're doing that internationally.
Yeah.
We had the opportunity to engage in a cultural exchange yesterday with the Emirates, learning about the history.
How was that?
That was wonderful. We learned about their culture, we learned about their food, we learned about, again, the cultural lifeways that we as Yuroks hold dear, as well as the traditional aspects and how that might be not only conveyed, but again, preserved here within the UAE.
That's amazing.
So those are the three things that the Yurok tribe is not only talking about, but doing.
Yeah, we talk a lot about nature-based solutions increasingly, which is all about how do we take better care of our natural lands, our waters, to enable our lands to sequester carbon and to reduce climate impacts on communities. A lot of those nature-based solutions are based on traditional ecological knowledge that Native peoples have been actually practicing since time immemorial. And so that sort of speaks to what you're talking about, point number two, around the technical, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think what's also fair to share is the actual dynamic and innovative partnerships the state of California has with the Yurok tribe, with their leadership, as well as the leadership of Taylor James, as well as our tribal council. We've really seen the paradigm shift and the trend of looking towards tribal government, tribal business entities, of leading that natural-based solution space. Again, the Yurok tribe, we were able to visit with Madam Chair Leanne Randolph, the ARB, again, the California Energy Commission, and the various state agencies, and again, most importantly, the Natural Resources Agency, that we just see that and able to highlight that to other countries, other forms of businesses, of those principled approaches of cooperation and synergy.
Yeah,
So we like to share that story. We believe that's going to be, again, the trend, not only in the state of California, but globally.
Yeah, and you've been able to, as a sovereign government, plug into California's carbon reduction programs, and through your work on that, actually be able to gain back some of your ancestral territory, which is amazing. And you're a great connector. So we had a breakfast of our California delegation, and then you brought leaders, indigenous leaders from other states. So part of this COP is all about making connections and strengthening networks and connections that will bring home. Javier, what's your take on this COP? You get a sense that there's momentum. I mean, on the one hand, that we have a lot of promising conversations. On the other hand, we know that climate change impacts are accelerating, and we're running out of time.
Well, I think first and foremost, the loss and damage conversation, there's Article 6 components are going to be playing out not only in real time, but for generations to come.
And remember, I said loss and damage is a fund that was stood up through these negotiations that is specifically focused on helping the least developed, poorest countries that are impacted by climate change. So, for example, if a hurricane takes out a Caribbean nation, oftentimes that government doesn't have the resources to actually build back with resilience. So this loss and damage fund that's now actually getting funds in it for the first time is going to be able to help with that.
And that's one of the the big things as well, being at the table, seeing these conversations, negotiations play out.
Yeah.
Not only again in the planning stages, but the actual implementation.
Yeah.
Secondly, the indigenous peoples worldwide, again, are coming forward with these not only demands and requests, but seeing the actual enforcement of those rights and privileges within these developed countries. So I think any of those types of financial and blended opportunities, the Yurok tribe supports those and looks forward to benefiting from those as well.
Amazing.
As an indigenous community.
Yeah.
And I think what also is fair to really get out of these types of international forums is really what that respect and understanding sees. The Yurok tribe, again, has never conceded diplomatic or foreign relations. We have been engaged in bringing international diplomatic missions to the Yurok Preservation Ancestral Territories. 1.5 million acres of our ancestral lands looking at what we want to turn.
Yeah.
But again, the implementation of those natural resources management strategies and tactics is really effective.
Yeah.
So we were able to have Madam President Fawn Sharp of the National Congress of American Indians. We also have various other tribal members that are not only youth delegates, but again also leading their spaces of their respective ancestral territories.
Yeah, and I gotta say, last thing I'll say is, you know, the moral authority that you bring as Native leaders, as Indigenous leaders. I always say, you know, part of what we need to do in our agency is learn from our tribal leaders that have been stewarding California, stewarding our environment since time immemorial. So thank you for being here and leading with that moral righteousness. Good to see you. All right, yeah, it's great to see you. Thanks for those emoticons, folks. Javier is in the Yurok are wonderful. Okay, Bonnie, come on in. So another set of leaders that we have here are civil society leaders, and that's kind of UN speak for nonprofit organizations that are bringing science, are bringing advocacy to push us to move further and faster. And my colleague Bonnie here works for the Climate Center, which is based in California, and so we have a lot of interaction because you are constructively helping us and urging us to move further and faster. And I was really excited with something you organized, which was a press conference here at the COP on nature-based solutions. So I'm just interested in, first of all, just share a little bit more about like what you do back in California, but then why Climate Center is here, and then you know why you wanted to engage the legislators and myself to really lift up nature-based solutions.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the Climate Center, we work on state policy, really ensuring that California is accelerating its climate action, and the same line what science calls for, yeah. Right? And so that's a big part of the reason why we applied to be NGO observers here at COP, to make sure that we are learning from other actors all around the world, related sciences, what the most creative solutions are, what kind of partnerships are needed to really accelerate these actions on the ground. So we've been coming for several years now. This is my first COP, cool. Which has been so exciting. I'm here for 2 weeks, and 4 days in now, my body is totally exhausted, but my mind and heart have never been so energized.
Really?
Yeah, it's been fantastic because we're amongst 70,000 other people that are all here around the world for the same goal, mostly, yeah. All of that, right? But just to like sit down and take a break from all different events, and you end up striking a conversation with someone and learn about what they do. And it's just so heartening to realize that people are working on this from all different angles and all different perspectives. And it really is a global movement. And this year, it's especially exciting because nature has finally risen to the top of the agenda.
What does that mean?
So it's being recognized as one of the 4 main pillars of this year's COP, right? So just like we focus on energy transition and transportation, nature is finally being understood as the solution that it is, that it provides, which I think really gets to the core of what climate change is about, right? It's this relationship between us and our natural environment, and shifting that relationship from an extractive one to one of interconnectedness and stewardship. And California, we have done a ton, especially in recent years. And that's why we wanted to organize that press event, because as I was looking at all of our recent accomplishments, is 1 year after the next, we're taking incremental steps.
Yeah.
Including this year, putting in statute 3930. And that's something that has been really interesting. A lot of the conversation has been is about scaling up biodiversity goals and climate,
Yeah.
and really understanding how interconnected those two are. That they are so intrinsic, you cannot have one without the other.
Yeah.
So
I want to break down for a moment because some folks might not follow this. When we talk about nature and nature-based solutions, I'll give you a few examples. Reducing deforestation across the world, reforesting native vegetation in places that are degraded, reducing catastrophic wildfire risk in places like California, improving the health of soils by getting more organic content in the soils that's better for growing crops, retains water and stores carbon. It's restoring and protecting and restoring wetlands, both coastal wetlands, inland wetlands. It's planting shade trees in cities that have an environmental benefit and protect people from extreme heat. So it's all of these actions that, as you point out, are good for nature. They're good for protecting this rich diversity of life that we have, but they're also needed to actually help the world get into balance with its climate.
yes, no, that's exactly right. There is so much potential to draw down existing carbon into our soils and into the biomass, right? And in soils especially, we have degraded our land in so many ways that there needs to be an increase in soil organic matter.
Yeah.
So, we're actually putting together a panel on that later this week as well, getting to the heart of that, because increasing soil health not just draws down carbon, but also increases water efficiency.
Yeah.
Right. And it helps us not only mitigate climate change, but adapt to the pressures that we're already seeing.
Yeah. And it's exciting, we all work from different perspectives in California, and then we come here and we're sort of a California team in some ways, kind of sharing what we can do. But like, what's the sort of reaction when you say you're from California, good, bad, or indifferent?
I would say it's indifferent.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of great things to share that are coming out of California. But there's a lot of stuff going on all around the world that I think California can also learn from. A big part of the reason that we also come here and we bring delegates from the legislature and other NGO partners is, one, to showcase California's leadership and really try to inspire similar action. California luckily has the political leadership needed to kind of test out a lot of these strategies.
Yeah, driven by strong popular support, right? Pushing us to be leaders.
Yes, exactly. So with that, and as one of the largest economies of the world, which we always like to say, we also have a responsibility to, test out what's working best and export those policies elsewhere.
Yeah.
So this is a great opportunity to do that and, get in line with the latest science and really understand what California's position is in the larger world that we live in.
Yeah, and we come here with humility and we say there's still plenty of work we have to do in California, and we'll bring back those learnings. Yeah. And I should have mentioned for folks that are joining, my colleague Geeta Chandra has in the chat box more information on Bonnie's organization, as well as the different organizations that have been represented by our guests. So Bonnie, thanks so much. Thanks for all the work that you're doing, and exciting. All right, so we've got a couple more folks that we're going to bring on here in just a moment. Let's see who we've got. I've got Casey. Are you ready for this? Okay. Thanks so much, Bonnie. So we talked about sort of the role of the United States as either being solution provider in this or a challenge. So I have Casey Kadams with us, and Casey leads the U.S. Climate Alliance. And so, Casey, you're here. Well, tell me why you're here. Who the hell are you and why are you here?
So the U.S. Climate Alliance is a coalition of 25 bipartisan governors, co-founded by California, along with New York and Washington. We formed in the last administration to ensure that states and governors continue to advance the ball on climate action, regardless of what happens at the federal level. We're obviously working in really close partnership with the Biden administration, and we're here to support our state leaders, our governors. We've got Governor Lujan Grisham of New Mexico here, as well as top state leaders like Wade, and as well as leaders from Maryland and
A bunch of different places.
bunch of different states
I mean,
and territories that are here.
And places that, we don't necessarily think about as close partners, like Tennessee, for example.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. Now, you said 25 states.
Yes, we represent, more than 60% of the U.S., or we represent about 60% of the U.S. population, 55% of the U.S. economy. So we have a huge, market share. We've got huge, authority across our coalition. And so COP is an amazing opportunity to support collaboration, to support learning from one another. It's an opportunity for California to share their lessons and your experience, your leadership, and to inspire leadership abroad.
Yeah.
And also for you to learn from the work that's happening in other states, territories, regions, local governments across the globe, and hopefully bring those lessons back to California.
Yeah, and you talk about it. There were sort of two chapters of the U.S. Climate Alliance. During the Trump administration, to your point, you formed to basically say, "Hey, America's all in." Like it's because of states. I think we maintain trust that they're Americans wanted climate action and we're moving forward.
Yeah.
And now in this Biden-Harris era, it's super exciting given
Really
all
collaborative.
all really collaborative. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's collaborative. And, you said, obviously there's a huge amount of support for climate action, but there's also a lot of benefits that you all are delivering, right? Our states and territories are employing more clean energy workers. We've got lower levels of harmful air pollution. We're growing our economies faster than the rest of the country. And it's great. We had an amazing conversation with White House National Climate Advisor Ali Zaidi this morning.
I saw the slide of that. Yesterday's.
But this morning we had a town hall. I mean, again, that's what COP is. COP is a lot of these different forums and different convenings to come together and talk about shared challenges. But we've got a partner in the White House who wants to help us, identify what the challenges are and help us overcome the barriers to getting financing for clean energy, making permitting go a lot faster while ensuring meaningful community engagement, identifying opportunities to increase solar, increase resilience.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, and I would say, one thing we've talked about is while, we're of course so proud of Governor Newsom's leadership and before him, Governor Brown, Governor Schwarzenegger, but American governors are leading across the board. Hawaii, the first state that has this 100% clean energy standard. I heard the governor of Maine at one of your events this year. Yeah. They've converted a large portion, I think 40% of their homes to essentially electric heating and cooling, getting away from gas in the home, decarbonizing the homes. Yeah. Governor Hochul, Governor Inslee, such leaders. You have a fun job.
I have a very fun job. And, it was great to have you with us in New York, where we announced a new commitment across our 25-state coalition to quadruple heat pump installations across the country, which is important because we're getting zero emission heating and cooling in people's homes, which is both great for emissions, but it also means that your airs are better air to breathe for kids and for parents. So, and again, that's an example of bringing our sort of collective purchasing power together to say, to manufacturers, we're going to deploy 20 million heat pumps across our 25-state and territory coalition. And again, that's thanks to the leadership of California and all the other states.
That's awesome.
But I have to say here, this COP has been so exciting because state and local governments, are not sort of formal parties to the UN. And so I think for a lot of COPs in the past, we've been left on the sidelines at the COP. And this is the first COP that there's been a local climate action summit, the first ever, and a historic opportunity to come together. I think you maybe participated.
Yeah, and I talked a little bit about that. I mean, part of what we're trying to do here, beyond pushing for stronger action on fossil fuels and methane and equitable climate finance, is basically say states, provinces, cities need a more formal way to participate in this effort now, because I talk about this as like implementation crisis, which is we're, collectively across the world and even in our countries not meeting our goals fast enough. So how do we have a more central role for the governments that are actually, on the front lines implementing this work?
Absolutely. And I think I totally agree with all of that. And I would say, in addition, it's a lot about durability. It's to demonstrate that, no matter what happens at the federal level, you've got this incredible backbone of state and local partners all across the planet who are going to continue doing the work of advancing climate action, regardless of what their parties are saying. And I think it's an opportunity for you to raise the collective ambition of the international community to say that in many cases, California is able to go further and faster than the federal government can. And so this is your chance to come on the global stage. And I think it's really important what's happening.
Yeah.
There's a new multi-level partnership that came together with 62 countries pledging to incorporate and better integrate the work of subnational governments or supranational governments, into their nationally determined contributions. And it's your chance to raise the global ambition on climate.
Yeah, and I was talking to 8 governors, leaders from Brazilian states, and they have an association just like yours and similar to Australia. So it's these states, these provinces, cities that are driving their national governments to move further and helping them implement. Well, listen, thanks so much for everything you're doing.
For all
Thank
that
you
you're
for being such a
doing.
thinker here.
You're just doing an amazing job representing California here on the global stage.
Oh, thanks. Along with a whole lot of other people.
Yeah.
All right, we're coming. We've got just, I think, one or two more folks. Actually, last one. Thank you so much for joining us here. We really wanted, so we would have, our days, I've been here for 4 days, are filled with meeting folks from around the world. It happens that we had a set of meetings and a reception with our North American colleagues and specifically our American colleagues, which is why you're getting a heavy dose of California. But I thought it was interesting to introduce you to some of the folks that are over here to identify just the diversity of leadership that we have over here in Dubai. So I want to bring on Carolyn Choi from Southern California Edison, which is one of our utilities in California. And Caroline, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you too.
Now, look, you wouldn't necessarily associate big businesses or a utility with a big climate action summit. But yet you and your boss, Pedro Pizarro, who leads Southern California Edison, have been here at several COPs. And I appreciate that you are really active in this. So just talk a little bit about why you're here. What's the value add for the utility and what kind of conversations are you having?
So Pedro's the CEO of the holding company, S International, that owns Southern California Edison. Yeah, and we've come to the last few COPs partly for Edison and partly for the industry because Pedro now this year is the chair of Edison Electric Institute, the trade association for the whole investor-owned electric utility industry. And so part of it is we see the future on climate really being driven by electric, right? It's got to be 100% clean energy, which California is on its way to doing, and then more electric usage in vehicles and in buildings. And so the utility is instrumental in making all that happen. And that's really the reason we're here, is to drive that message home in terms of the importance of the electric system in achieving our climate goals, collective climate goals, and then the things that need to be done to ensure that we're able to get all that work done, right? To have an electric system that is reliable, that's resilient to the changing climate that we're already seeing, and that's ready for all the electrification that's coming. And that's really our message for COP.
So are you able to proselytize a little bit on behalf of a utility that's actually bought into 100% clean energy? Because I think a lot of us read about utilities that are fighting this effort. So I mean, who are you talking to here? Who are you trying to influence?
Yeah, so we're talking to a lot of stakeholders, both policymakers, in California here, but also elsewhere, about the California experience and what we're doing and why we do think California is leading the way and why it makes sense. People talk about economic growth. Well, we've been able to demonstrate in California, as you well know, that California's had economic growth over this last decade, even as we've moved towards higher and higher renewables, more electrification. And so it's an economic driver. It's a jobs creator. And so being able to share our experience about the things that we've learned and the things that have worked well and the things that maybe haven't worked as well, and what can be done to help advance the effort. We're also talking to NGOs about the work that we're doing to see if they can help move policy forward and programs forward that we also think are instrumental to achieving those goals.
And so what advice would you give to governments, to folks that are watching these COPs? And there's a large business presence, and sometimes that gets sort of characterized as greenwashing. How do we hold our corporate partners accountable, but also recognize that you all are critical partners? I mean, we're not going to make this transition without business leadership.
Really good question. I'm not saying that there isn't greenwashing, but I'm sure that there is some of that here, and just more broadly. But I think one of the things that I do see is significant business commitment to these goals. And a number of companies like ours who have carbon neutrality goals that are aligned either with their states or with their countries' NDCs, or because they see the benefits of moving towards carbon neutrality. So part of that business message that's why we're here, is to learn from one another, because what's happening in other countries is often something that we can try and take back, and then, hey, let's try that in California, right? I mean, just with AES earlier today, and they're doing a project in Chile that was really fascinating to hear about. In fact, they're
speaking on a panel tomorrow morning. I was like, oh, where is that? Where is that? So I can go check it out. So a lot of learning that happens here to then bring back home and see if that's something that we should be doing. And also just hearing about experiences around, for us, a lot of risk assessment, resilience discussions that are happening here also. So not just on the mitigation side, but around adaptation and resilience to the changing climate. I think that's just as important.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole other conversation about that. Look, I want to thank you because, you know, so often we have conversations and in settings like this, and other countries say, well, we can't move there because, you know, we want our economy to grow. And in California, as the governor and our leaders explain, we are growing. We're actually outpacing the rest of the country. We think because we're visionary, and this is, you know, and this is attracting, our climate policies are attracting investment. Doesn't mean the transition is always easy, but to have you guys here, you and Pedro and other business leaders from California saying, look, we're part of this transition, is really powerful.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And we do see that, like I said, the electric sector is so critical to the achievement of these goals, and we're 100% on board with getting there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so great to see you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. So listen, we're at the top of the hour. We've been joined by, I think at the peak here, 250 people that on 8 o'clock on a Monday morning joined us. And I should have mentioned that we have recorded this whole conversation. There's set up conversations. So if you go to resources.ca.gov in the next couple of days, you'll be able to download this and share this with others. Huge thanks for the work that you do. You're joining probably because you're curious, but probably because you're interested and active in this work. Know that we're over here, as our colleagues have said, learning, sharing, advocating for us to move further and faster on climate change. We have no time to waste. So thanks once again, and have a great start to your week. We will see you again. Let me tell you this, last slide. If you have any questions or follow-ups for us, hit us up at this email, Secretary Suggestions at Resources, or suggestions for future Secretary Speaker Series.